With the recent news at Microsoft and Xbox laying off a huge amount of employees, I wanted to look at this subject in a little bit more depth and take a more measured approach compared to some of the other YouTube videos that I've seen on this subject that are a little bit more rant focused and really ask questions to arrive at truth and try to figure out what does this mean for video games moving forward. And so what's kind of interesting about this is that there were a lot of games in development that have basically ceased production, whether that's Perfect Dark or the Zenimax MMORPG project. And I think that's kind of interesting in a lot of ways because that means that these games were in such a state that they were absolutely not worth finishing. Maybe that means that they were in development hell, or there just really was not a likely outcome of them earning a good amount of financial return for the amount of time and cost that would be needed to finish those products up. And I think that's kind of interesting that these games almost certainly probably were in just really terrible states. I mean, you have to imagine, what does that even mean? There's no salvageable game there. The gameplay mechanics are messed up. Something is wrong probably with some of these projects, or at the very least, they wouldn't earn a financial return. But these projects have been in development for so long that the ideas clearly were probably validated and so many other things. So you have to ask yourself, okay, what does that even mean? I mean, these games were probably in such a terrible state that they weren't even worth finishing. And I think that you have to ask yourself, what is the core problem at play here? What is really wrong? Why did these layoffs happen in the first place? And really what's going on with the recent performance of Xbox and the quality of their video games? And I think that you can kind of divide this into three segments. So the first way you could look at it is that maybe the problem is the kind of lower echelon of the employees, the developers, the programmers, the artists, people like that. Then you could say that maybe the problem is the mid-management. So the kind of leadership above these software engineers, these artists, QA, whatever, or it's the overarching strategy at Xbox. Now, when I look at this subject, it seems highly unlikely that the core problem is the programmers or the artists. I mean, it very well could be. Maybe there is a lack of skill or competency there, but to me, it doesn't seem to make sense. It almost kind of seems to point towards the overarching strategy and organizational structure that seems to cause these problems. Because we have to ask ourselves, right? If you look at some of these video games, they've been in development for a huge amount of time, a number of years. And in a lot of cases, especially with some of these video game programmers, they work huge amounts of hours for not the greatest salary relative to other programmers out there. And so when you look at that, is it really a factor of employees not working enough? There's not enough time that goes into the project to get a quality product out? Or is it an organizational structure problem? Is it that the strategy of the video game project or the way that everything is managed, the core problem at play here? Because if you think about it, you have a lot of people in the industry working really long hours. Development times are longer than they ever have been, especially compared to other games in the past where you'd see a game that was cranked out after 2 years, 3 years, and now we're seeing double that. And that's despite improvements in technology. So is it really the artists and the programmer? I mean, it just seems highly unlikely. Seems very unlikely. There is kind of a situation where there is more to these graphic engines like Unreal, where there's more things that you have to account for, like physics on art assets and stuff like that. But maybe that goes back to my original point, which is maybe it's not that. Because if you're kind of organizing the game and you're trying to figure out the strategy for the game, maybe the key is to not focus on some of these elements, but to focus on the things that will really matter, or get the game out in a faster time. And once again, so that kind of points more to a mid-management or overarching strategy problem within these game development projects. Because in the end of the day, you have to ask yourself these core questions, which is, what is the problem with these video games? Why are they getting canceled despite huge amounts of time, huge amounts of effort? Is it the ideas? Are the ideas bad? Well, if I look at Perfect Dark as an example, I don't think that the idea of Perfect Dark is necessarily a bad idea. I think that it could be extremely profitable. It could be a great and fun video game. And I think that in a lot of these kind of franchises, they're good ideas. There's a good foundation for them, but it could be the idea. And I think some video game ideas are not necessarily the best, but really, is it the case in this situation? There's so many amazing IPs and franchises that Microsoft owns, or there's studios that work with Microsoft that just don't seem to be utilized properly. They're underutilized. I mean, you have really great franchises, whether it's Rare with Banjo-Kazooie, Halo, Gears of War, Fable, that just seem to have problems, or there's no game. And so you have to ask yourself the question, what really is the problem here? To me, it seems like a big component to this is the organization of these video games and the management of these projects. I mean, should these video games really take 7 years of time? should they really cost as much money as they cost? You have to ask yourself that question. And especially compared to video games in the past that had so much shorter development times and arguably are better quality products and they're more fun video games. So in a lot of ways, like I said, you could argue it's the technology, it's harder to work with, but you would think that it would be faster and easier to work with. Maybe it's the focus on things that don't matter in the video game, like the tree moves with the wind in this certain situation and there's certain lighting effects. But once again, if that is indeed the problem, maybe that is a strategy and organizational problem where you're focusing on the things that don't matter. And what ends up happening is you have a development cycle that's 7 years long, or it costs a huge amounts of money when in reality, it does not yield you more revenue, does not yield you a better product. I think that's probably a core component is how are these games managed? How are these games organized structurally to make games come out in a quicker fashion and under a lower budget? I think that's just such a huge component to all this. Is it really not understanding the core drivers that make a fun video game? What is a good Halo game? What is the essence of Halo? Do I stick to that creative vision, or do I try to chase trends and monetization of trends? Do I understand what this franchise is? Do I understand what the fan base wants? And I think that if you have a select group of people that are in charge of the overall direction of the game, whether it's the art direction, the gameplay mechanics, the storytelling, whatever, it can really just drive the whole thing down into a bad place. So you have to have competent people in these positions to drive home the success of the video game. It has to be this unified creative vision that is ultimately going to be fun and valuable to the customer or the gamer. Not only that, though, it's about actually getting the product out the door. So it's more than just having a great video game concept and good gameplay mechanics. You have to eventually release the product. You have to organize the employees and the workforce in such a way to get the product done and completed, and in a way that is sustainable for the business and for your employees so that you keep them there long term. So it's not just the video game execution, it is how you go about creating the video game organizationally from an execution perspective. And there seems to be some sort of problem, I think, within Xbox that does this. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it just seems to point in that direction. Maybe there is this organizational structure with the way that these video games are created that lead to these problems. So there are too many people, there are too many cooks in the kitchen, decisions are made by committee. There's probably some sort of situation where productivity is decreased, or there's a lot of rework or something like that. And of course, the people behind the overall execution of the product, maybe that is kind of the core driver that funnels down into poor quality work that leads to all these bugs or lack of innovation or lack of good gameplay mechanics. And I think that this is really probably the core of the issue. I mean, how do you actually fix these problems realistically in the end of the day? How do you get to a situation where you don't have these huge layoffs and these huge projects that are over budget, that take forever, and then they release to a very minimal result? I think that probably one thing is the cost of development. There probably needs to be lower costs of development so that you can take more creative risks. You also probably have to have an organization and structure that is conducive to making the video games and an execution within those video games. And I think that there's an understanding of the creative aspect of video games. Video games in of themselves are very creative endeavors. You have to realize that there is a level of risk to this because there is the combination of all these artistic elements to the video game. There's the music, there's the art assets, there's storytelling, character design, there is the gameplay mechanics. And these are very creative endeavors. And I think you want to have a very strong vision. You want to have a vision that is focused on bringing value to the customer, bringing value and fun to the gamer. And I think that in some ways, maybe this is lost. The people that are in charge of the decisions for driving home that overarching vision, maybe it's just not really working. And it's also kind of combined with this problem of huge elevated costs, huge amounts of time that take to make this video game. And then once again, that all funnels back into this execution of actually making the product in a timely manner and a quality product. Because you have to ask yourself, is it really necessary? Do you need 800 people to make a video game in 7 years that's only minimal? I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean you need 14 years to make a great product? Or is the overarching structure wrong? Do you need to have smaller teams? Do you need to have better execution? Do you need the right people in the right places to make the fun video games? Now, I don't know if that's true. It's an interesting idea. And of course, we don't want overall video games to fail, right? We'd love to see amazing video games. You would love to have the problem that there's so many amazing video games that you can't play them all. You don't have enough time. There's just way too much money to be spent on video games. You want that problem. And ultimately, you want for the people that are making these video games to produce high quality products, because otherwise it's just this overall bad thing for society. It's people that have invested time into their lives into projects that aren't even released, or they don't provide fun or value to the end customer, or it's put the strain on the economy for all this time, money, and investment has really gone nowhere. So ultimately, as gamers, we don't want this. We don't want to see suffering, because ultimately we'd love to see great video games. We love to see quality video games. But for that to happen, I think you have to focus on the value creation. You have to analyze what exactly is wrong here. What is causing some of these poor video games to be made, or these long development cycles, or whatever it is. And maybe it's just Xbox is changing its direction. These studios just don't make sense in that overarching direction, but it does seem a little sudden, especially when you look at some of Xbox's recent releases. So that's my analysis. You hope that these games can be better in the future, but are the strategies at Xbox really going to change so that you can have games come out faster? Are you going to see higher quality games in the future? I'm not so sure, and we'll really have to just wait and see to see what happens.